Hey friends, about half an hour ago, or give or take, Frost Giant went and they stopped answering questions in the AMA ahead of what we assume to be Tuesday's release. They said late June. They've been dropping teasers all week. Tuesday's the last, or next Tuesday's the last Tuesday in June. So it's likely going to happen then. And I figured, hey, we should probably go and take a look at what they said in this AMA, because there is some interesting stuff here. Of course, this is just a summary. If you want more, if you want to go and really dive into that, I encourage you to go read the AMA. I'll put the link down below. But we're going to talk about like the 5 things that I think are probably the most interesting about this AMA, which was, by the way, focused primarily on the new Stormgate feature. So if you're looking for news on tier 3 units or things like that, I'm going to be talking to Monk on Monday, and I'll certainly be asking him about it, even if I don't know if he can tell me anything, but I'll be asking him about it. So first and foremost, we have this new mechanic, right? Called Stormgates that are going to be replacing the creep camps. And Monk goes into that. We're going to pull this up. There we go. Monk goes into that. It's like, okay, why in the world did we go and why are we swapping creep camps out? What is the process there? And he says the idea of Stormgates came initially, there we go, center this a little bit more, came initially when we took a look at the creep system and how we could rework it. Some downsides of our previous iterations of creeps included that they were tedious. They didn't offer enough exciting rewards. They worked the same game to game. They encouraged non-interaction. So like one player would take their health camp, other player would take the other health camp, just not really worth it. And they didn't really make sense in the lore of the game, was the feedback. I think, creeps there, living world, and you can make that make sense, but it didn't really fit. The art wasn't there yet. And they just couldn't find a way to make it properly work. So this says they spent a lot of time trying to diagnose these issues and iterating on creeps to improve them. But at the end, it wasn't getting there. I still think that creeps could have been viable. And they talk in another comment about how they might try to go and bring them back in some way, or maybe in team-based modes or things like that. But for now, it wasn't super viable. They didn't get it to where they wanted to do, so they pivoted it. And starting the end of last year, early this year, they've started to add this creep camp idea, or this Stormgate idea. And they're saying because of the removal of these creeps, Stormgates were designed, or the experience with the creeps, Stormgates were designed to be exciting in general, give interesting rewards that would actually influence the game to game, add some variability so each map doesn't play the same each time, which I'm a big fan of. I think that one of the downsides of a traditional Blizzard-style RTS game is that it is, I'm not going to say every map plays the same because that's not true, but you kind of know what you're expecting in a big map versus a small map, and there are predominant metas, but having just this little bit of extra pseudo randomness, I think, is going to be very interesting. Encouraging interaction, which is again good. I really like that Stormgate is attempting to tackle this problem of the players that just want to sit in their base and turtle up, and it's just a frustrating way to play against. It's just not fun. It may be fun for them, and sure, I'm sure there are still players that are going to try to play this way, but it's really not fun to play against, far more than a lot of other frustrating styles. So I'm very happy here that they are, and that was the goal with the creep camps as well, but they're trying to force interaction. And then also, it makes sense in the lore. Stormgates, the game is named after Stormgates. It's a nice, to use the words of Gobsmack, who, by the way, congratulations, Gobsmack, if you're watching this, for getting hired into Frost Giant about a month ago. But having that hook that makes Stormgate a different RTS, that makes you want to go and load in every time because you want to get the perfect Stormgate reward, or whatever it is. They also go on to say, just right below this, by the way, it's funny, we have Culp responding to this because technically he's listed as a 3D artist, but he is also he does a lot of hats. But he's like, yeah, they weren't fun. We might be trying them back in other game modes, in 3v3 and Mayhem and 3ve and co-op and things like that. But in 1v1, they just weren't fun enough, which I think is fair. I think, again, and it's also really hard to balance. Having one random reward every 3.5 minutes, because they say it's roughly around every 3.5 minutes. So 3:30, 7, 10:30, etc., are going to be the timings for the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, creep camp, or Stormgates, and then you move onwards. In 1v1, just not fun enough. Now 3v3 and co-op, that might also be a little bit more useful, but it's kind of what we're looking at here. So that's how they came about. That's good. But I think a lot of you, and I've been trying to figure this out as well, is how exactly are the creep camps going to work? So Culp actually, let's pull this up. How does the tug of war, there we go. So this was actually a really nice comment by Turlock, who does not have a Reddit thread. Shout out to you if you're watching this from the Discord, who went and asked a technically only supposed to be one question per comment, but he had a very nice multi-layered one that Gerald copied over in its entirety. And we got this really nice answer from Culp. So the question is like, okay, how does this mechanic work? And the answers we got from Culp here, he talked specifically about the tug of war and then kind of the process. So a Stormgate is going to be a tug of war in that you have to pump more damage into your opponent than your opponent. And it sounds like there are cutoffs. So it's not like if I do 1 point of damage and my opponent does 0, I capture the Stormgate. It's no, I have to commit to the Stormgate. I have to do a significant amount of damage that apparently is going to be scaling by Stormgate tier. So the 330 Stormgate is not going to require as much damage as the 1030 Stormgate. It's actually going to be interesting if it continues to scale after that point. So like with the 14-minute Stormgate require more damage than the 1030, and that's not answered here. But you attack the Stormgate, you move it towards your favor. You have to fill out this progress bar where it starts with 2 blue and 2 red pips, and you need to fully progress the damage to light up all the runes with your color to gain control of the gate. And by the way, this is a timed setup. I don't think they say, I saw if they said exactly how long the Stormgate is open, but they do make some illusion that like during the nighttime is when this is going to happen. So that would maybe imply that it's open for 3.5 minutes. I kind of think it's going to be shorter though. But anyways, you have to pump sufficient damage in, and sufficient damage more than your opponent, to capture it. Additionally, players who have captured Stormgates receive damage bonus, or captured fewer Stormgates, comeback mechanic here, receive the damage boost the next time around, offering increased comeback potential for the player. They also say in other points that the Stormgates give vision around the Stormgate for everyone. So don't know exactly what the radius is, but when the Stormgate spawns, it gives a bit of a vision radius that everyone can see, which makes it significantly harder to contest. That's just how that's going to be, because you can't like sneak it. And they say later on that if you go and if you have, say, missed out on the first Stormgate, if your opponent took it, you're going to have more vision around the Stormgate than they will in round 2. Sounds like you might also have like a damage multiplier as well. I don't know what that number is going to be, but your damage sounds like it's going to count for more. The more Stormgates you've missed out on. So that's also going to be a trade. Is it worth it even contesting the tier 1? If the tier 1 rewards aren't super useful to the build you're playing, is it better just to give that over to your opponent and then have a better chance of getting better rewards in tier 2? I don't know. These are questions that are really uncertain. They do talk about in this AMA quite a bit about how they found out that the optimal response when the people in the playtesting was to actually not take the Stormgates, to go and expand and cut unit production, because your opponent, you know where they are in the middle of the map, pumping damage into this thing, or going to go try to harass outlying bases, or try to jump on top of your opponent's army. Because I know I've seen some people in the Reddit thread saying, look, they attack me, I turn around, but that's a volley of damage that you're not doing that your opponent is. That can matter quite a bit, even in a lower time to kill game, or a higher time to kill game that Stormgate is. I'm not going to say it's perfect. I'm not going to say it's this, oh, wow, my opponent bursted damage on this thing, which means I can kill them. But that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, especially on slow fire rate units like an Atlas, or units that require time to spin up. Maybe it's better actually with Vulcans, because you can spin them up to full and then swap their targets and be fine. Or, dealing with Argents who require energy to do empowered shots. Now, I assume that the energy on their empowered shot is going to be spent attacking the Stormgate. So if you spend energy attacking the Stormgate, no longer are you going to be, your army's not going to be as powerful fighting your opponent. Like, these are traits that are going to be very interesting. Also goes on to say, the question was, I assume their unit rewards come out of the Stormgate immediately and you can control them. Is this true? How does this work? And apparently the player that successfully captures the Stormgate now controls it, and then they get a little UI over that Stormgate that controls it, that chooses from a random set of rewards to bring into the world from the greater universe, this alternate universe the Stormgate is allowing, that is popping up. These rewards are spawned instantly and are controllable by the player. They will all come in the form of a unit or a totem and have unique powers and abilities. By the way, I don't think this is this is not the answer, but they do talk about this later on. Those totems are going to be player controllable and snipeable, which I am so excited about. So I was a little worried when we saw this format, and I talked about it a little bit in the video yesterday. I was a little bit worried that we were going to see Stormgate or the totem rewards. They're like, okay, we just clone a unit, whatever. And then that kind of prolonged interactability is not going to be there. I think prolonged interactability is like super cool. You get a totem that, to go use this example I've been talking about, like 6 months. You have a totem that you then put back and drops an aura on your production buildings that speeds up their production time for the next 2 minutes. You know, that is a long time duration because I do not want my opponent to get that totem down. I do not want them, even if they get the totem down, I want to be able to snipe it. I don't want them to get those extra units. Like, that is a long and interesting interaction period. And just kind of instantly having it like as a global spell or something, I would not have liked that. So I'm very happy here that we have this long tail on these totems and the units. I mean, in fairness, the long tail of interactability on the units is you can kill them. You know, that's not a big deal. But making sure that these more spell-like things also give you that tool, I think is very cool. Talking about randomness, though, because that has also been a point of contention, spawn locations are random, and it only spawns at one spot in 1v1. We did lots of testing on different things here, but one at a time really created the most interesting games. So if actually you look back at the Allen video, it looked like it was 3 spawning at once, which could make sense. That encourages maybe some more multitasking. Even the player that doesn't get all of them maybe probably gets 1 because it's hard to contest all 3 at the same time and get your army splitting properly. But it's going to be 1 for now. There are going to be 5 potential spawn locations on the 1v1 maps that exist at the moment that are going to be the ladder pool to start. Who knows if that's going to change, and they're going to test that out. But for now, 1 spawn location every 3.5 minutes, randomly chosen amongst the 5 different Stormgates. Are there more than 3 options per tier? Yes, we're going to find out about those on Tuesday, it sounds like, or maybe Monday when we get the patch notes. Is the loot faction specific? And does the Stormgate inform you of the potential rewards you open it? So it's the same pool. It's the same, which I like, I think. I think having faction-specific loot pools are not super exciting to me. It could be cool to have like 1 faction-specific loot item. Like, you get maybe 1 or 2 things that show up. And realistically, the faction-specific loot item are the, whatever it's called, the totem that lets you clone units. Ah, yes, my faction-specific reward is I get to clone a Vulcan. It would be very cool, by the way, if that cloning process took a little longer. Like it's say maybe a 5-second cast time, and you could clone anything on the map. Well, yeah, creeps aren't going to be there anymore, so you could clone anything on the map. You can sneak it in with a hit squad, pick it up in a dropship, and clone your opponent's worker and get some of their tech eventually. You could go and clone their Weaver or their Hellborn or their Archangel. Like, that would be really cool and give you kind of another avenue of this mind control ability that only the Celestials have. Obviously, of course, interactable, cancelable, snipeable. Higher risk, higher reward, but would be very cool there. Would love to see that. And yeah, players who have captured Stormgates receive a damage boost next time around and vision. So that's kind of the basic mechanics of how all this works, which I think is kind of, I'm not totally sure how this is going to work out in terms of 1v1. Like, we're going to find out, right? This is a massive change. Balance is probably going to be horrible for like a while as we figure all this out. We'll see. I think, for example, you know, if you get lucky and go for a Vulcan servo push, that's going to be very strong if you are able to clone yourself a second Vulcan. But we'll find out. Also, moving on here, right? Talking about, so we talked about how the mechanic works and talked briefly about the reward system, but Culp does explain a little bit more about the controls, the things you're going to get. I talked a little bit about how that's going to work, but the cool thing about this is that you can combine rewards. So, for example, you get the cloning totem on tier 1, and then you get like the rock throwers or whatever on tier 2. You could clone those. But even more importantly, like the big example he gives is you can save those until much later. So you can go and clone your Flayed Dragon, or even better, you can avatar, which gives a HP damage attack speed buff. I think something like that. It makes one unit much more powerful. You can avatar buff the Flayed Dragon and then clone it. That's massive. Like, that is a very difficult thing. That's good. Like, tier 3, I think the tier 3 rewards should be game breaking. I think it's one of those things, like taking Dota as an example here, when you get to 60-minute items, those items are intended to be game breaking. They're intended to end the game, but everyone has access to them. So eventually everyone has access to them. They're an on-the-map reward that theoretically break the game, or supposed to be supremely powerful, because the game is not necessarily supposed to go on much longer than that. So making this like 10:30 to start to be the time when we really start to get end game stuff and moving on, like that is, I'm totally fine with that. But yes, also, as Culp does point out, they can be, if you're holding on to them, they can be sniped. And that would just be kind of a waste, especially because it's making it a lot more difficult for you to go and take the next Stormgate, right? If you take a Stormgate over your opponent, it's easier for them to take the next one. So if you get it like a cloner on tier 1 and try to hold it for the next 7 minutes and it gets sniped, your opponent's going to have better access to tier 2, tier 3, or tier 2 maybe. And if they don't get tier 2, they're going to get much easier access to tier 3. So definitely some interesting comeback mechanics built in there. Also, a little bit more information about the mechanics. Stormgates will only spawn at night. So the daylight shift orange and the sun returns to set. You can prepare yourself for battle. You don't have any map weather mechanics that Stormgate affects. That sounds fun. Open ideas if you have any. And if you have any ideas for like weather-related Stormgate effects, drop in the comments below. On that note, there's a powerful localized weather-themed Stormgate reward to choose from in the late game. Yeah, that's the storm thing, the dimensional storm I think they're talking about. Maybe there's something we haven't heard about. But anyway, so it will be at nighttime, but we don't know if it's going to be like the entire duration of the nighttime, how that's going to work. But this does seem like a pretty cool mechanic. Seems rather well thought out. Talking about things being well thought out, though. And there we go. This is the comment I'm looking for. Talking about things being well thought out and being fair, this will have RNG in it. This mechanic does have RNG. That's a thing. And I like some amount of RNG in games. I think it can get too far, and that can be a problem. But when we talk about having kind of controlled RNG, so it's going to spawn in 1 of 5 places, you get 1 of 3 rewards. That gives the player agency. There is some luck, certainly, and Stormgates are going to spawn at times that are better for your opponent than they are for you. But with 5 spots, it's really hard for them to prepare for that for the most part. And realistically, giving that 1 in 3 chance does mean that you have some agency in the matter, which I think is going to, as long as the rewards are well designed, and we're going to have to see. I imagine things are going to get swapped in, swapped out pretty quickly here, pretty significantly as we figure out exactly how this is going to go. But as long as that agency is there, I think it's actually going to be pretty good. So Monk says managing the amount and feel of RNG is something we were very conscious about when designing Stormgates, as we're aware of the traditional purist philosophy that some competitive gamers have towards RNG, which is RNG's bad. Which is kind of funny because I think we'll see a lot of that from the StarCraft people. When, high ground missing is the thing in Brood War, I'm pretty sure. There's definitely some RNG with things like Scarab impacts, and there is RNG in Brood War. There's less so in StarCraft 2. Maybe a little, you can say there's a little bit in terms of shot timers. There's a little bit in terms of where Widowmine's going to fire if you don't control it. But RNG, I think, I think RNG is in a modern game is totally fine. If it's managed well. Anyway, I'm not sure if we're managing it perfectly in the first iteration, but we have designed many aspects of Stormgate's RNG with fairness in mind. For example, in the first iteration of Stormgates, the spawn locations always spawn relatively equidistant between the 2 players' spawning locations. Oh, okay, that's now. That was the first iteration of their testing, I don't think. Does that mean that tier 1 is always going to be in the middle? Is that how that works? Is that what he's saying? I'm not sure. We're going to find out. In addition, the reward system utilizes a 1 of 3 system that many of the other successful games have employed, especially in the strategy space. What I like about this type of RNG is that it puts agency, what we were talking about, on the player after the moment of RNG. That is, the player is empowered to make a decision and can feel smart about choosing the correct choice. We feel very good about this system and think it greatly mitigates the feeling of RNG being the reason you lost. Fair. Some additional ideas that we haven't implemented just yet include more heavily weighing the rewards based on the game state. For example, if you're losing, Stormgate will more likely give you a choice of reward that scales and how much you're losing by, which is difficult. How do you mathematically compute that? Is it resources lost? Well, in a TVZ, for example, in StarCraft 2, Zerg is always going to be behind on resources lost. Do you hard code a threshold in? Well, that's going to change by the meta. Do you look at supply counts? Well, what if I'm investing a lot more in tech? It's a difficult, algorithmically proving who's ahead and who's behind is, I think, going to be some difficult math. I don't have an answer. We'll see how they go for that one. I do like the concept as he talks about here, if your opponent has a lot of air units, you might be more likely to get an anti-air reward, which is kind of cool. Well, as I say, I don't know how much I like that. I think you should still, I think if the RNG tilts in your favor, you might, great, I've been saved here. I have something. But I feel like the universe bending towards helping you is probably not thematic with the game. Actually, these, you're just pulling things in from the broader universe, and it just getting lucky is fine on this thing, but I think bending towards you is maybe not the best. So I'm not sure how I totally feel about that. I'm down to try it, but Also, because this is primarily a 1v1 right now, they did talk a little bit about the plan for co-op campaigns and other modes. So for co-op campaigns, they haven't discussed it lately, but the ability for players to enjoy the campaign cooperatively, they're very excited about that. They still want it to happen, but it's just not there yet. They got to get the PvE mode. They got to relaunch, and they're going to call it a relaunch instead of just update, which implies significant changes. Relaunch our PvE co-op mode before shifting gears to focus on cooperative campaign, which is fair, which is totally fair. But those are the biggest things. Let me take a look at my notes here and see if there's anything else that was super interesting. There we go. Okay. One final thing. All right. So the final thing is we get a little bit more of a hint into what they're going to do with Celestials as they work to revamp them, which I would expect to start seeing a little bit more of in 0.6. So maybe like early August. The number one goal of Celestial revamp will be to simplify the faction, make it less confusing, while at the same time retaining the core theme of building mobility. Celestials have a lot of confusing mechanics, including the entire arc ship structure, how they mine, power, etc. Yeah, simplifying, I think, Celestials makes a lot more sense, making them kind of less gimmicky as a whole, but still giving that ability to make it so the structures are kind of like units, but not really, I think is still interesting. So I'm excited to see what they have in store for that. One of the big ones are we now know how Stormgates work. It's going to be a good time. I'm very excited to give it a try on Tuesday. I'll be running a Stormgate patch day tournament on Thursday evening. So we give players a little bit of time to play some games and figure things out and put some strats together as we figure out just how broken this is. Of course, if you like this and you want to go stay abreast of all the Stormgate content, like for example, my interview with Monk on Monday, probably coming out on Tuesday. Fingers crossed if I can get the edits done in time. If you want to stay abreast of all that stuff and cast in Stormgate and all these different things, make sure to go sub to the YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitch. I'll catch you next time.